Welcome to Compact Warfare from compactwarfare.com, formerly known as 5-Minute Warfare, the show where we explore key moments from the history of conflict, from ancient battlefields to modern warfare. This is episode 35, The Rise of Gunpowder. Few inventions in human history have had a greater impact on warfare than gunpowder. It revolutionized the battlefield, rendered castles obsolete, ended the dominance of armored knights, and helped shape the empires of the early modern world. But its journey from a mystical curiosity to a military mainstay is as fascinating as it is explosive. The story of gunpowder begins not in Europe, but in China. In the 9th century, Chinese alchemists searching for an elixir of immortality instead created a recipe for destruction. They discovered that mixing saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal produced a highly combustible substance. At first, it was used for fireworks and rituals, but it wasn't long before someone realized it could be used to frighten, harm, or kill. By the 10th and 11th centuries, the Chinese had developed early military applications. These included fire arrows, flame-spitting weapons known as fire lances, and even primitive bombs. Soon after came the earliest versions of hand cannons and gunpowder-fueled siege devices. The weapons were crude, unpredictable, and often as dangerous to their users as their enemies, but they marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in how wars would be fought. Gunpowder didn't remain a Chinese secret for long. Knowledge of the substance spread westward along trade routes and through conquest. By the 13th century, the Islamic world had not only adopted gunpowder, but also improved upon it. Muslim engineers created a range of weapons, including bomb-throwing catapults, incendiary grenades, and early firearms. It was in this era that gunpowder's potential as a military game-changer became clear. The Mongol Empire played a key role in accelerating the spread of gunpowder. As the Mongols expanded their territory across Asia and into Eastern Europe, they carried with them knowledge, technology, and tactics. Gunpowder was part of that transmission. And so, the secret that had emerged in a Chinese alchemical experiment made its way to Europe. Gunpowder reached Europe in the mid-13th century. English scholar Roger Bacon wrote about it around 1249, although it remained experimental for decades. However, by the early 14th century, it began to appear on European battlefields. Initially, gunpowder was primarily used in siege warfare. Cannons, though slow and unreliable, could cause psychological terror as well as physical damage. Their thunderous roar, clouds of smoke, and ability to bring down walls altered the dynamics of siege warfare permanently. One of the first major battles where cannons were used was the Battle of Crécy in 1346 during the 100 Years' War. The English deployed primitive gunpowder weapons, though they played a limited role in the outcome. Even so, the presence of artillery on the battlefield marked a significant turning point. But it wasn't just about what could be destroyed. Gunpowder also changed who had the power to destroy. For centuries, Europe's castles had been virtually impregnable. High stone walls, drawbridges, and moats made them the ultimate defensive structures. But with the arrival of powerful bombards and heavy artillery, those fortifications were suddenly vulnerable. The siege of Constantinople in 1453 is a famous example. The Ottomans employed enormous cannons to breach the city's walls, ultimately ending the Byzantine Empire and demonstrating once and for all that stone walls were no match for the force of explosives. Castle design had to evolve. Architects began building star forts with low, angled walls that could better absorb and deflect cannon fire. The rise of gunpowder had sparked a revolution in military engineering. At the same time, handheld firearms were also evolving. The arquebus, a shoulder-fired weapon that used a matchlock firing mechanism, became common in the 15th century. Though slow to reload and limited in range, it was far easier to use than a longbow or crossbow. This shifted the balance of power on the battlefield. Armored knights, once the dominant force in warfare, were now vulnerable. No amount of plate armor could reliably stop a musket ball. Infantry armed with firearms became the new backbone of the army. This transformation gave rise to what historians refer to as the military revolution. Between the 16th and 17th centuries, European warfare underwent significant changes. Gunpowder didn't just alter tactics, it changed entire military systems. Large standing armies, standardized training, logistical supply chains, and military bureaucracies all emerged in response to the demands of this new style of warfare. Europe wasn't alone in adapting to the gunpowder age. In fact, 3 major Islamic empires came to be known as the gunpowder empires. The Ottomans, the Safavids of Persia, and the Mughals in India all used gunpowder weapons to build and defend their territories. These empires combined traditional cavalry tactics with the use of artillery and firearms to significant effect, conquering cities, protecting borders, and projecting imperial power. Gunpowder also played a critical role in the rise of European overseas empires. As European ships ventured farther afield during the Age of Exploration, they carried not just sailors and missionaries, but cannons and muskets. Naval warfare was transformed by gunpowder. Ships became floating fortresses, able to bombard enemy ports or other vessels from a distance. Colonization efforts were often supported or enabled by superior firepower. Small groups of well-armed Europeans were able to defeat much larger indigenous forces who had never encountered such weapons. Beyond the battlefield, the influence of gunpowder reached into politics, economics, and culture. Monarchs who could afford gunpowder armies were able to assert control over rebellious nobles. Centralized states replaced feudal arrangements. Fortified towns became strategic assets, while military innovation drove advancements in chemistry, metallurgy, and engineering. Warfare had become more destructive, but also more scientific and state-controlled. By the 19th century, traditional black powder had begun to be replaced by newer, more powerful chemical explosives, such as nitroglycerin and TNT. But the legacy of gunpowder remained. It had ended the age of castles and knights. It had rewritten the rules of siege warfare and reshaped the world's map. From China's fire lances to Napoleon's grand batteries, gunpowder had steered the course of history. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Compact Warfare from compactwarfare.com. If you did, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.